Hey guys,
morning.
welcome to another episode of AIA Digital Marketing. Today I'm very excited. We've got a very, very cool guest, Ari Scott, who is a part of the ADHD business coach and consultant, actually created that, and has the ADHD Entrepreneurs Group, where Ari, I believe that you coach and consult with entrepreneurs who have ADHD. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly that. So essentially it is finding out the correlation for the individual based on how their ADHD shows up in their business, and then working with the strengths of that to really skyrocket them to the next level.
Yeah, cool. So what, Ari, I mean, this is such a interesting topic. I think that for me, having spoken to so many business owners over the years, there's definitely got to be some kind of a link, right?
Yeah. You wouldn't believe actually, like it's phenomenal. So there's not too much research on it, but the research that there is basically says that statistically people with ADHD are around 300% more likely to start a business than people without ADHD.
Right.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. And there's sort of two sides of a really important conversation, which we can get into now or we can talk about later. It's up to you.
Yeah, cool. Let's get into it.
Yeah, awesome. So first of all, it's the fact that ADHD in itself, now it's better understood, especially, actually brings a lot of strengths that are completely synonymous and necessary with like big time business success. So for example, if you think adversity to risk in entrepreneurship is really important, and that's part of the neurological design of ADHD. Right. Problem solving, thinking outside the box, creative thinking, hyper focus, which is kind of a misunderstanding about ADHD. A lot of people think that ADHD is a deficit of attention because that's what it's called, but it's actually just really poorly named, because yes, ADHD isn't a deficit of anything. It's a regulation issue. So actually, when people with ADHD are passionate about something or excited about something, they focus on it far more than, traditionally people without ADHD do. So they get so much done, and, 12-hour days don't feel like 12-hour days. So there's a lot of phenomenal strengths in there. Then on the flip side of that, people with ADHD don't tend to do too well in traditional employment.
Yes.
So it kind of becomes, well, we're naturally good at this, and also we don't really have a choice. So it's kind of how that balance comes into it.
Yeah, right. Why do you think that they don't do that well in traditional employment? Typically.
I think, well, yeah. So, and, I preface this conversation by saying everything is kind of typically and stereotyped here. Lots of people with
you're generalizing, right?
Yeah, but for the sake of ease. And like what it is, the way that employment is set up, more before the pandemic, to be fair, but like, let's just say that, is that, you have to be there on time, for example, something as simple as that. And people with ADHD, their perception of time, there's a characteristic called time blindness. So everything's kind of now or not now. So being chronically late or chronically early sometimes tends to come into that. I don't know if you've ever had a boss that enjoyed people being late often, but I certainly haven't. I don't think
No, I don't think so.
No, unfortunately not. And then, a bunch of other things just in terms of like a work environment, an office environment is not ADHD friendly at all. There's, a need to move and be stimulated, and just a different way of working that isn't catered for in employment, but is massively catered for in entrepreneurship.
Right. So would you say that ADHD people tend to focus on one thing and get kind of tunnel vision and just obsessed about that one thing?
100%.
More so. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's short-lived, unfortunately. So the way that the ADHD brain works is that it's motivated by different motivators than people who don't have ADHD, right? So they are urgency is one, as in like deadlines. So that now and not now I was talking about earlier. Novelty. So if something's new, it's exciting. Competition, although people don't like to admit to that one, but I'm pretty sure competition is very motivating for ADHD. And passion. So combining all those things really makes up that hyper focus. And then there's neurological reasons too, which I won't bore everybody with because it's just only interesting to me really, but there's like switches that don't really work between brain networks that mean that it becomes like not even a choice anymore. Like it's an obsession, which can be detrimental. Like we do need to sleep, and like often we'll forget to like use the bathroom or eat, but also makes for a really good entrepreneur, right? So like it's a balance.
Yeah, cool. What do you reckon, Wade? Do you think this sounds like me?
I mean, I think that you have to have a certain type of personality to be an entrepreneur and make it successful, you know, like it's about escaping the 9-to-5 grind and building your own dream. But at the same time, it's 24/7. So there's that trade-off, you know, we all think that, oh, working for myself, I'm going to work less. I'm going to, you know, go on my holidays and stroll by the beach. But that's not the reality. And me knowing you, you're very easily distracted, which is fun sometimes and, you know, can be a detriment to others, but you definitely have a little pep in your step.
Bit of fun. Some of these traits definitely sound a bit like me.
I like the pep in your
Shiny
step.
object syndrome for sure.
What was that, Ari?
I like the phrase pep in your step, and I'm definitely going to steal it because like I feel it's a really nice way to say like, Wade, get it together.
Yeah, cool. So I think that it's fascinating. You know, I think that this is something that a lot of people have seen ADHD linked to things that are challenging for them in school and being educated as well. Like maybe is there a link between ADHD and dyslexia at all?
There is, yeah. So there's a link between, so they're both neurodiversities, right? And usually you'll find that ADHD coexists with some sort of other neurodiversity. Not always, obviously, again, but there's dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia. So I have dysgraphia. So basically that just means that I sort of, if you imagine a drunk 3-year-old with a pen trying to write their name, that's what my writing looks like.
Yeah, but that's the same as me.
That's what my art looks like.
I've got exactly that. Even I can't read my writing half the time.
Me either, honestly. I don't know why I bothered to take notes, to be honest. But it's interesting because so like I have a really high IQ, but on paper, literally, not even metaphorically, it doesn't look that way.
Yeah, it's so like being a doctor, right?
Exactly. Similar. Yeah, we'll go with that. Those two, they do tend to go together. They really do. And it's about, and you know, in terms of managing ADHD in a business, it's just about really identifying where it shows up and how to best utilize it and how to best mitigate the challenges that come with it. And it just comes down to 3 basic things. And this is sort of the difference between ADHD and entrepreneurship in general, because these are the most integral parts. The first one is self-awareness. So knowing that you have these symptoms and where they show up, and instead of, you know, hyper focusing on changing your logo for 12 hours in a day, being aware of the fact that that's actually not particularly beneficial and efficient, and curtailing that. And then next to that, you have to have self-forgiveness. And the reason you need to have self-forgiveness is because you still have ADHD. So if on that day you can't do that, instead of, you know, ruminating on it and beating yourself up, saying, okay, well, what can I do in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and not getting stuck in that mindset of like, well, you know, that's right, I have ADHD and I am going to not amount to anything like everybody told me I would, or blah, 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 because I can't even stop doing my logo for 12 hours. But then the third one is the having no self-pity, I think, is really important. And I don't mean don't feel your feelings, like feel your feelings in those moments. But simultaneously, I think business success across the board comes from an ability to look for where you can take responsibility for things to make change, not feel sorry for yourself. So that comes down to figuring out what you can control. So being aware of who you are, how you show up, being kind to yourself about it, and then making change and making action is essentially, you can't have success in business with ADHD without covering those 3 bases, in my opinion.
Cool. Yeah. The victim thing's always a risk, right? I think that a lot of people, the self-pity thing is very dangerous, because that's a vortex,
because it's so comfortable.
It is, yeah, and it kind of gives you an out from responsibility. It's a way for you to be able to, although you know, the thing that you think you're going to get out of doing that, actually it makes it worse. Do you know what I mean? Because you end up feeling like you've been given a bit of a shit go. You know what I mean? And then when that happens, when you feel like it's outside of your control, the opposite to taking responsibility. It makes you feel really powerless.
Right? Well, responsibility and control are married.
Yes.
The more responsibility you take, the more control you have.
Right.
That's simple, you know, and when you say, I'm not going to take responsibility, you feel without control.
Yeah, totally.
And then you just get stuck in this really
but we all,
dark
this
place.
is something that it's not unusual. It's not like, only, you know, ADHD people or everyone kind of has to fight the fear, you know what I mean? And take on the challenge of the day, I guess.
So I'd agree with that. But the way that ADHD element comes in is, like, remember how I said before that it's like a regulation issue. So it's name bully. So let's just like sack off the name ADHD forever in this conversation, because it's rubbish for what it actually is. Yes. Because as well as not being able to regulate attention in that way, that applies to emotions as well. So the thing with having ADHD is that pain literally hurts more. Like failure, we take failure harder by design. We take, you know, blame harder by design, criticism, like that. The feelings genuinely physically hurt more. On the flip side of that, though, what I tend to find is there's a lot of focus in the ADHD community on that, but not on the fact that that means that when you overcome that, that should be more celebrated, because it's huge. It's a bigger thing to overcome. And simultaneously, it also is, there's so much beauty in the fact that that means when you are successful, you feel that more, or when you're happy or joy or, you know, creativity or something like that. So although, you know, it's kind of experiencing those things, and especially in that self-pity is much more challenging with ADHD to drag yourself out of. Yes. Taking a time to recognize when you do how much of a big deal that is so significant, and really important. It's important across the board for entrepreneurs, don't get me wrong. But I would say arguably for ADHD entrepreneurs, it's more significant because it is more challenging.
Yes.
I have a question in relation to that, though. Does someone with ADHD experience the high, the success, much more so than the, you know, the pain?
You know what? It's funny that you
both ways.
Well, so if you'd have asked me that a little while ago, I might have said yes. But there is a thing that I've noticed as a theme, wherein when you achieve that success as an ADHDer, it doesn't give you quite the buzz that you expect it to. And I think that's quite a lot because an ADHD brain is, you know, understimulated. So it's lacking dopamine. It's lacking dopamine going to the right places. And dopamine is a reward chemical. But the way that dopamine gets released isn't when you actually get a reward. It's in anticipation of a reward. This is across the board, right? So like, say, when people get excited about Christmas, they're excited about the idea of Christmas. That's dopamine getting released, the reward of Christmas, right? So the issue is ADHD brains are constantly in search of dopamine-free stimulation. That's why business is a really good place to be. Obviously, there's some negative things that we try to avoid there. But in that search for dopamine, once we've got the reward, it actually doesn't release the dopamine.
Yes.
Because that's what we've been doing in that journey.
Yeah.
It's boring again. So that's where the problem comes in, because then it's like, well, I'll just do this thing instead.
You just go straight away. You've already started thinking about the next thing that you need to be happy, you know?
Exactly that. And that's why I say, you know, that self-awareness practice, like being aware of the fact of what you've achieved, because we just often just don't even notice like major, like we start sort of ticking off major successes as like tasks on a daily to-do list, because we don't get that same thing. And that's why, again, that self-awareness of that stuff is just so vital, vital.
Like rewarding yourself, right? Sort of acknowledging the things that you've done right, or the accomplishments that you've made, and taking the time out to reward yourself for that is important.
Well, who are you doing it for, and what's it all for? You know, like majority of the time you're doing it for yourself. So
totally.
And not everyone's going to give you a pat on the back. You might have to do it yourself.
I'm definitely an external validation guy.
I think we all are at some point.
Yeah, I'm willing to admit it. Do you know what I mean? If I pull something off, it kind of is worthless to me if no one else is around to see it. You know, like
I mean, I'm an influencer, so I get it.
yeah, you're the same, right? Yeah, cool. So, Ari, how did you start your journey as an influencer and you know, exploring this avenue of ADHD and the link between that and influencers? Entrepreneurs.
This started because I lost $100,000. Funny enough, so I previously. No, it sounds worse than it is. It's just a really good
Okay.
shock way for people to pay attention.
Yeah.
So, and it works.
It works.
Thank you
Yeah.
for letting me test that out. So essentially, I used to run a company called Handle, which was a ethical food delivery platform. I was going really well, and we we're going for angel investment, and we closed an angel investor for $100,000. And 2 weeks before our first launch, everything set up, restaurants, app, e-bike partnership, because it was all like environmentally friendly and so on and so forth. My investor called to tell me she had cancer. So we discussed it, and I was like, I think you should pull out. Like, this is going to be stressful. You're a sole investor in a company. Like, let's just call it, like, health comes first, always. So important. And I stand by that. That doesn't bother me, but I would much rather that was the case. It did kill my company overnight, though. And that was my own fault anyway. That's what you get for relying on someone else's money for a business. Big lesson learned, by the way.
Although that's what people do, right? That's what successful people often do. They use other people's money.
Other people's money.
Evidently.
Other people's money.
I'd rather spend someone else's than mine.
But don't do that, though. This is the key takeaway. But it sort of left me stone dead in the water. And then I was on an app, Clubhouse. I think that we spoke about it a little bit. It was when it was new. I've
seen you on there.
Yeah, so it was invite only, like a long time, like whenever that was, like a year and a half ago or whatever. And I was on there, and had some spare time then, and I was in a room with like a Clubhouse room with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and I casually mentioned like I had ADHD, and all of a sudden nearly every other entrepreneur in that space was like, oh, me too, and it just piqued my attention so much, and I was fascinated, and I was like, well, like, this can't just be a coincidence, right? What's the connection? So speaking of that hyper focus, 6 months I spent like knee deep obsessing over how ADHD shows up in business, why this is the case, how it helps, how it hinders. And I was on Clubhouse doing live talks on it almost every day, with a whole other group of ADHD entrepreneurs all around the world, from just starting out to multimillionaires, like crazy, with this correlating link, and all experiencing the same problems. So the thing is if you have ADHD in business and you're on day one or on day 100,000, you still have those same issues. And it was just like so fascinating to me. And then off the back of that, I just started, building an Instagram around it. And turns out I wasn't the only person who was interested in that, because it blew up so quickly. But again, I made a lot of content. So I dedicated myself to making one carousel post and one reel every day for a month, just on that, while doing all the other like business building stuff. And actually that did not move the needle at all, which was one of those self-awareness moments of self-forgiveness, just like, that's okay, I'm not hurt by that, like pretending but then I reckon about probably a month and a half after that, my content just sort of started blowing up, and a few pieces went viral, and it just sort of went from there. And it's been amazing. All jokes aside, I love what I do. I love serving a community of people that I share that life experience with, and the struggles of having ADHD, and bringing their strengths into their limelight so that they can build a life by their design, and that aligns with who they are and their values and their own brain. I can't imagine, I feel so blessed to be able to be like living a life driven by a purpose by that. Like, that means so much to me.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, there's definitely something there, because people, I'm sure there's a stack of people out there that are not diagnosed, right? Would you agree with that? A lot of people with ADHD go their whole lives never really knowing they've got it, or suspecting that they've got it, but being able to, so are the people that you're helping self-diagnosed or diagnosed clinically usually?
Yeah, so most of my one-on-one clients are diagnosed clinically. However, there's a huge wait time at the moment around that, and that is across the world. It's everywhere as a result of the pandemic and also social media. So the question of people being undiagnosed and self-diagnosis is actually one I'm quite careful about, because I believe fully that if you believe you have ADHD, that you should go and see a psychiatrist and get that diagnosis. The reason I believe that is because a lot of ADHD symptoms match a lot of symptoms of a lot of other, disorders, or even like things like trauma, right?
Yes.
So you don't want to be, there's a reason psychiatrists study for so long and train for so long to do that stuff. On the flip side of that, though, the self-diagnosis thing in the meantime, I understand that too, because if you're right about that, you want to start learning how to best manage that. So I think it really comes down to a lot of different things. Plus, it's a privilege to be able to get a diagnosis. It's not cheap. Australia, even, it's not cheap. In the US, it's even more expensive, as I'm sure you can imagine. And then the UK, which is where I'm from originally, on the NHS, people are waiting 2.5 years to even see the first appointment.
Wow.
So it's a really complicated question around that. So whereas all of my clients are diagnosed, that is coincidence. And I do take people who are self-diagnosed, but we find out pretty quickly if they were right, because if I know what I'm doing with ADHD in business, and if they're not resonating with that, that might be why.
It's unlikely that they've got ADHD.
Exactly.
I heard about this thing that, sorry, I'll just turn the levels down a bit there. It's a bit much. I heard about this TikTok craze that was going around where people were self-diagnosing just with like silly little kind of hacks. Like one of them was, if you like listening to the same song over and over again, then that's a sign.
Well, so yeah, a couple of things on that. The first one is that the problem with diagnosing ADHD is that everybody in the world experiences ADHD symptoms. Everybody.
Yes.
Like, let's say one of the typical ones, losing your stuff all the time, right? Yes. I guarantee both of you, like, well, look, wait, I'll talk to you. Wait, you've probably lost your keys at some point, right? You know what I mean? But with ADHD,
I've lost my marbles.
Yeah. Well, me too, but I don't reckon that's ADHD. That's just life,
it's a human
right?
symptom.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a Wade problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the issue becomes like stuff like that. So losing your keys, for example, if everybody does it, right? The thing with ADHD is it's chronic, and it's been there a whole amount of time. So impulsivity, everybody is impulsive sometimes. Hyperactivity, everybody is impulsive sometimes. And I actually have a real like personal gripe with TikTok diagnoses, because it's kind of different on Instagram. The information is a lot more accurate. On TikTok, I think somebody ran, and I wish I could quote it and I can't, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. Somebody ran a study on the amount of misinformation on ADHD and TikTok, and the percentage was massive. I can't remember it specifically. Yep. And it's dangerous. It's super dangerous. And it also feeds into a stigma that already exists around ADHD. That's, we can thank the tabloid newspapers for 20 years ago, that it's not real, that it doesn't exist, that it's the pharmaceutical drive to sell medication.
Yes.
That stuff has been really chronically damaging for the ADHD community in general. And quite frankly, stupid shit like that on TikTok doesn't help. So it's problematic.
So it's definitely a real thing. I mean, I know I had friends that were diagnosed with it growing up, and it was clearly a thing. Do you think, have you ever done any research into, or is there research out there into the cause of ADHD, Ari?
There's a lot of research, and it's again, it's something that's disputed, but there's pretty clear evidence now on certain aspects. For example, genetics. So there's a really strong genetic link, which again is actually kind of problematic, because a lot of children weren't diagnosed because, like, child psychs would say to their parents, like, do they do this? And they'll say, yeah, but that's normal. I do that. No shit, you do that. There's a genetic link. None of that stuff, caused by too much TV. It's completely inaccurate. Bad parenting, completely inaccurate. As I said, the problem was that the media really went for ADHD about 20 years ago, and they spread so much misinformation around this stuff, and so much damaging information, that now a lot of advocates in the space are like really working hard to undo. So it's not so much its cause. There's things that are increased risk factor, but I wouldn't even use the word cause. I would just say born this way, like Lady Gaga style. So Lady Gaga said that? I think so.
What said what?
Born This Way, that song.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That's Lady Gaga.
Yeah. So genetics, you think, play a big part? And it's,
I know for a fact, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And it's hard to, that's a problem, because a lot of our parents, or our parents' parents, weren't diagnosed, right? So we don't really know whether or not we're genetically predisposed to having had ADHD.
Are there
Yeah.
triggers? Are there triggers for you, say like using social media or certain situations that will heighten certain symptoms of ADHD?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny because it's the same across the board though, really. Like it's not good for anyone to scroll through their social media for 3 hours.
Sure.
And it does make ADHD worse, of course. Nutrition, exercise, things like that, all of the basic fundamental things that everyone should be doing, if they're not done by people with ADHD, make ADHD like more chronic. That being said, it's harder for people with ADHD to do those things because they struggle with the executive function, so like the planning and organization and motivation that goes into that, right? But the thing is there's also just general society now, again, from the pandemic, but also from social media, there's a lot of behaviors in younger generations that mimic ADHD now because they are exposed to so much like social media and stuff like that. So whereas
Being
it might not actually
bombarded
be
with
ADHD.
snippets of stuff, right? Just constant 5-second snippets.
Well, I read recently that I can't remember if it's an hour or day. So again, anyone listening to this, don't quote me. It sounds really bad. I just make up statistics, but I don't. But this one was that I think it said that we get exposed now to the same amount of information in a day that like 100 years ago they would have got in a year or two. I can't remember specifically.
Yeah,
again.
I believe it.
And that's
Yep.
imagine
Definitely.
like for a brain to process like that amount of information, like the effect on your like subconscious responses to things and stuff like that.
And our filters would be working overtime.
Well,
right?
yeah, accept and reject is working so much faster now because you look at a post on social media and within 0.2 of a second, you've decided if you're going to give it more attention or you're going to move forward.
Right. Yes.
Which is important for you guys. And you guys would understand that, you know, your digital marketing, you would understand that better than anyone.
Bumstoppers.
Yeah. You've got the adage, which is a good one for digital marketing, is if you confuse, you lose. So you've got such a short period of time to either give someone a reason to want to keep watching what you're selling, or make it really obvious and clear what you're selling straight off the bat. Like you need to be able to just go, that's a jacket, it's $200 within a second, you know, or do something crazy like a drone or a GoPro 360 thing to suck people in because it's interesting. But you can't. Yeah.
Oh,
and that was the problem. Like when you think of that TikTok stuff,
yes.
it goes back to what gets, like if someone is scrolling and someone says, blink, if you can blink in time to this song, you have ADHD, that keeps someone's attention, right?
Yes.
So people keep making that content, even though it's, you know, ridiculous, and it feeds into that machine. And in the same way, like, you know, you could have the best product in the world, but if you don't have the messaging or the story or the why or the attention grabbers, then you don't have a business. And it's like finding that balance between like not exploiting that in the way that it has been with TikTok and ADHD, and actually just selling really good services and products. And like, I think people like find that difficult because then they don't want to be that like salesy exploitation side. But it just creates this hot mess because like it's okay to sell your products and to be proud of your services and to market and to use those tools. It's really interesting, actually, the dynamics behind that.
Yeah, cool. I think our feed has gone down. Is it back up now?
Oh, we're still running, but because we're running a Zoom that's not paid.
Oh, I've got a paid Zoom.
All right.
Too late. Or do you want to, are you going to start the meeting again?
No, we may as well just run it for another 5 minutes.
Okay, run it for another 10. Okay, cool. Let's do that.
I'll chop it up.
Yeah, cool. So what about the connection, Ari, between like there's obviously reasons why ADHD can be challenging for people generally, right? It's got its kind of it's got its cons, it's got its setbacks, it makes certain things more challenging. What have you seen that are traits of someone who's got ADHD that help them in the business world as business owners or with as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said earlier, right, that hyper focus is massive. Building a business is a 12-hour-a-day job. So if it is something that you have, your brain has locked onto and obsesses over, you're going to get that done so much quicker than everybody else around you because that 12 hours doesn't feel like that 12 hours. On top of that, you know, you have that people with ADHD often tend to be much more creative and tend to solve problems. And that's because instead of having a linear view of the world, there's a certain way that an ADHD brain connects the dots in a way that other people don't see. If you relate, I see you're like relating to that. You're like, oh shit,
I
do
actually,
that.
yeah,
See it
I definitely can
happening.
relate, because there's you know, when a problem arises, I've got a brute force approach to solving it. You know, I definitely have found that one of my strengths is being able to think more creatively around how to solve problems than maybe some other people that I've worked with in the past.
Yeah, and like that's, you know, that's such a necessary and huge skill for being in entrepreneurship, right? And
Yes.
then, like I said before, that like not really like feeling risk in the same way. So the flip side of impulsivity is the fact that like we will essentially be like, okay, I'm going to do this, and the consequences don't really bother me, which in a lot of ways in maybe our personal lives aren't too appreciated by like partners, people with ADHD or whatever. But in
Yes.
business, that's what you need to be. You need to not think like, you need to not ruminate too much on the what ifs, and just be like, okay, I'm doing this, and whatever arises, I have the problem solving skills to tackle. I can handle that. And
Yes.
that is literally what ADHD is, right? And it becomes
Yes.
about really playing to those things and outsourcing those areas. So keeping in that creativity zone and that innovation zone, and as quickly as you can, outsourcing those challenges. Pay somebody else
Yes.
to do it. My number one piece of information: do not muscle through it, because you'll just end up resenting everything you've done, and then you'll
And you'll
lose that hype.
procrastinate, right? Like that's the thing. If it's
Oh
not something
yeah,
for me, if it's, I find, you know, I mean, this sounds like a bit of an excuse. I don't know, but I'm exactly along the same lines as what you say. When I get an idea and I get excited about it, it's now. I lock my teeth in, you know, and I don't stop until I get it done. Whereas if it's something I don't want to do, I find it very challenging to sit down and get it done, and I procrastinate a lot. You know, as a business owner, I think that I focus on the things that are really important, and then the things that are also important, maybe not as important and not as fun. I find them hard to do, which is why it's important to have a good team around you, right?
100%. And I think that, you know, there's something I always say time and time again on all my social media platforms, and that's dopamine doesn't pay the bills. And it's
Yes.
about having a real awareness of, especially when you know, say you launch an offer or a product, and within that first week it's not selling, and you take that hit, because ADHD people, like, sometimes we step a bit too far out of reality. So we'll be like, I've created this incredible offer, it's going to change the world, this is the best thing that anyone has ever seen ever. And then we put it out for 2 days and nobody buys it, and then it flips and we're like, well, I'm just going to create something new now, because when I'm creating something new, I'm getting that dopamine that I talked about, right? That reward chemical
Yes.
being released in anticipation. But the problem is 2 days isn't enough time to test if an offer is good or a product. But who wants to sit in rejection when they can sit in dopamine?
Yes.
Right. So although it's really good to innovate, there has to be, again, self-awareness. You can't just innovate all the time. So it's
Yes.
about really knowing yourself, your ADHD, where it shows up, how, and then
Yes.
literally just stop creating offers and products for a bit, and like
Yes.
get it done and outsource the boring stuff.
Yes, great. So Wade's holding up a piece of paper. What does it say?
Oh, Billy, the whole point of me holding a piece of paper to give you notes is so I don't talk
I hope it's
over
not
the top of you.
Wait, is
Yeah.
it a compliment? I hope it's a compliment. Imagine if it's not, and you have to
I'm just
it
trying
out.
to keep him, give him some
Some
direction.
points. Yeah,
some
I don't need them.
direction.
Ari's fascinating. I could do this all day. This is cool.
We're
Yeah,
just gonna keep talking forever. It's
yeah,
fine.
just keep rolling
Me and
along.
Billy's becoming a client as we speak, actually.
Yeah, that's right. She's signing me up, dude.
Basically just a
Okay.
sales school now.
So there's definitely the you know, that you kind of because an initiative doesn't meet the expectations, the probably unrealistic expectations of someone with ADD, where you go, this is gonna make me a millionaire in a month. You know, it's the best offer ever. I'm gonna get what I want out of this, and then it might be pretty good, but it's not what you expected. So you're saying people tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You just kind of go, nah, on to the next big thing that's going to make me a millionaire within a month, you know?
So how do you
100%.
harness that drive and that passion to stay on course when you're not getting the results you expected early on?
So you hire me. And the reason I say that is not even just a pitch. That's quite literally like, that's my ideal client. That's where they sit, right? So
Yes.
you know, we tend to find that there's like actually have an image for it. It's called like the ADHD entrepreneurs map. So A to B is like idea to launch. B to C is where that sort of hyper focus wears off and it's replaced with the reality of actually owning a business, and then that's replaced with like overwhelm and burnout. So in that area, it is about building systems around you that work with your ADHD to automate and outsource as much as possible. So if you're somebody that, you know, like you said, like hates admin, hire a VA, get them to do it, but really focus in on like being aware of what you're doing. And like, don't, you see so often that people will just, ADHDers will just start like, you know, well, I'm going to create a webinar, but there's no like clarity around their offer or a purpose because there's no outcome. And it's about, you know, essentially reverse engineering the process. 5 years time, where do you want to be? Okay, what do we have to do this year to do that, this quarter, this month? So it keeps them on track, but in a way that provides those core motivators: novelty, urgency, passion. You know, like it's about designing your business to work with your ADHD, and that's all it comes down to, and putting systems in place that you get from me. That makes that
awesome. Cool. And all right, so the question I was going to ask was, Ari, have you got an example of an entrepreneur or a business owner that had ADHD or has ADHD that you have helped, or and how that's worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a number of them, to be honest. And I think probably the most significant one at the moment is a client of mine. His name's Damon. He's an ADHD life coach. He's a phenomenal entrepreneur, but he was stuck in that again about 6 months into his business, doing well financially, and then losing that motivation because that sense of urgency wasn't there as a motivator. And now he is, you know, constantly booking qualified discovery calls. His Instagram just blew up to 80,000 followers. He is on his stories every day talking about his business and his offer because he's had that accountability. And like, honestly, it's been like it's been such a privilege to like watch him transform from, you know, struggling in that place of, you know, that overwhelm and resentment towards the business to working with his ideal customer, like influencing the community and just absolutely blowing up. I do tend to attract quite a lot of people who work in the ADHD space as well, because people tend to want to work with a past version of themselves as an ideal client. And then on the flip side of that, I've had, you know, there's a client I have whose name I won't tell you because I'm not sure that she'd be okay with it, but she's very much in the startup space. So product based, and we have just like seeing the difference in terms of, so she did an MBA, and like one of the probably best testimonials I've ever had was her saying that she'd learned more about how to manage her business and blow it up basically from working with me than the MBA. Now that's not any critique to an MBA. The problem is an MBA is just not that ADHD friendly. So I guess like for me, like that was mind blowing. That was, you know, like that's like the you know the platinum, isn't it? Really, the
so
MBA.
how did you get these business owners from where they were to where they are now? What
easy.
Would, maybe some of our listeners that think they might have ADHD, or even if they don't, if they're entrepreneurs or business owners, what kind of simple steps do you think could help them that you've seen work?
Yeah, so I would say, especially in terms of your offer, so whether it's service or products and your marketing, creating streamlined services that are energy efficient is really important as an ADHD entrepreneur. So what I mean by that is putting systems in place to attract, for example, your ideal clients to you instead of chasing after them and burning yourself out. Remembering, like I said, dopamine doesn't pay the bills. For like prime example of that, if you're a service-based ADHD entrepreneur, stop booking discovery calls with people that you know are not going to buy, but you just need the validation of the fact that somebody is interested in what you do. Like that is so important. And again, just I can't stress enough that self-awareness piece. I really just can't. Like you have to be in a sense, like your own harshest critic in terms of that. Like, am I wasting time? Ask yourself these things. And I think like predominantly, as I said, the key thing is to get support and not do it on your own, whatever that looks like. It doesn't need to be an ADHD business coach or consultant. It just needs to be mentorship or, you know, somebody there who has done it before that you can learn from, so that you are not draining yourself out doing these things. And then, like I said, outsource as quick as possible. I cannot stress for an ADHD entrepreneur, like if you make $500 in where the first $500 you make, spend it on a virtual assistant. Just do it. They will do all of the admin for you. Like that is, like, in the long run, replacing time as your number one value instead of money is the key, like in terms of entrepreneurship. And then finally, measuring your success as stepping out of your comfort zone and how far away you got from your comfort zone, instead of measuring it based on financial success. Money is inevitable. Like if you put all the systems in place, you get everything right, you outsource, clear on your offer, target market, everyone can do that. But it won't come until you find yourself in a place where that's not the priority, because it's not motivating enough for an ADHD brain. Because if it was, you'd be in a corporate job and you'd just be dealing with it. So it's about like finding the like that passion and playing to it. Like who do you want to be, and stepping into that like transformation of that, and really being proud of yourself for that.
Yeah, cool. Perfect, Ari. That's really helpful. There's nothing more boring than making it about the money, right? Like that's
yeah, I mean,
just...
yeah, exactly. I mean, we all do like the money though. Like that's okay.
But if you find yourself like checking your business account balance 10 times a day, or looking at the forecast for the month over and over again, you're just asking for trouble, you know, in my opinion.
Well, you can't put a dollar amount. You can't put a dollar amount on personal experience, on growth. You know, like you can't buy that. Anywhere. That's right. You have to go through it. And I like that you said prioritizing that, and how far away you get out of your comfort zone should be a good indicator of if you're moving in the right direction, because success follows risk as well. You know, you've got to do something that maybe no one's doing, or doing something that's so like outside of yourself that the universe will reward you. Yeah, definitely. What were you going to say, Ari?
I just, well, I don't know. I have a thing that if you don't get the thought the first time, like you don't get it at all. It's a bit of an ADHD problem. But I think that, like in line with what you just said there, Billy, I think entrepreneurship in general is like 80% mindset. It just is. And it's about, you know, working more towards your self-belief than anything else, and trusting yourself that you'll figure it out, and remembering, I think it's really, sometimes it's so easy to forget all the reasons why you started doing what you did, and ADHD or not really. And I think that refreshing your memory on that and tracking the journey, seeing how far you've come. I like to write a letter to my business once a month, literally like, dear ADHD and BIZ, and like treat it like a partner, being like, well, thank you for all of this that you did for me this month, and like this is where you really annoyed me, so if you could stop doing that, that would be great. And that's because it's like really helpful to like process that, and like you know,
get it out.
Who's in business knows, like that is basically like you have two marriages in your life if you're in business, the one to your partner and the one to your business. And communication is the key to like any successful partnership, right? So talk to it like in that way. I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, I get that, but it's something that
I think it's genius.
It is. It's very smart. It's good to kind of forces you to reflect and process, because otherwise it's just monkey brain, right? It's just open loops in your head. You're just kind of playing endless tapes that never really go anywhere, and getting it out onto paper and getting your thoughts out there definitely help to close some of those loops, right? And make sense of what you're thinking. And
reading them back 6 months later, and, you know, seeing that probably you have bigger problems now than you had then, but they're the problems that you wanted. And I remember that, right?
Careful what you wish for.
Have
right?
the problems. That's a good
At some point, this is exactly what you were asking for. Just remember that.
So what happens next for Ari? Where are you going from here? What are your plans?
I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I definitely want to look to expanding. I'm going to keep one-on-one clients. I have a program as well, which is a 21-day sales mastery, which teaches sales to people with ADHD. And the reason for that is...
Sorry to interrupt, but do you think sales and ADHD go well together?
I do and I don't. And I think it depends. I think when ADHD people are selling for somebody else, yes, 100%. There is a massive amount of ADHD prevalence in sales. But as soon as they're selling their own products, less so, because it's way more vulnerable. And again, it's that dopamine, criticism, rejection.
Yes.
There's an attachment to that vulnerability that you have to overcome. And people, I'm going to be blunt here, might get me some hate, but quite often people who say, I just don't like being salesy, are actually saying, I just don't want to be vulnerable and risk getting turned down.
Yes.
So it's like working through that stuff. And a way to do that processes, having the questions out in front of you that you know what to ask. So or only getting on, sales calls with people who are your ideal client and are likely to buy and stuff like that. So that's what that program's about. And then in the future, I'm pretty keen to start doing some keynote speaking around the connection, because there's not very much awareness around it. And one major thing for me is that there's two places where ADHD is really dominant. One of them is entrepreneurship, and the other one is in prison, incarcerated. Wow. Yeah, so in the future, I'm 29 now, so like this is in the 30s plan. I'd like to start a non-profit that tests juveniles for ADHD after they commit impulsive crimes. So getting diagnosed early and then curtailing them into entrepreneurship. I already give all of my resources I give away for free to under 18s for that reason. Funneling that into something positive instead. So yeah, that's on for the future.
That's awesome, Ari. That's good. I love that noble cause. It's awesome. It's good to have that kind of stuff, right? It gives you a meaning and purpose behind it all. And obviously, very passionate about it. Very, very cool. Yeah. So that's great. That's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. I'm also impressed that you're only 29. I think that's you speak so eloquently and obviously are very knowledgeable on this topic. So that's impressive, and I'm very, very excited to see where you go to from here, Ari. That's super cool.
Thank you.
So thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's been awesome getting to know both of you.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks.
Cool. Keep the fire burning.
I will. You guys too.
Yeah. Peace out, Ari.
Bye.
Speak to you. Bye.